Well, we've made it through another year, ladies and gents, without blowing ourselves to pieces or descending completely into a Lord of the Flies style primitive society. And so what better way to celebrate a successful continuation of a further 12 months of fear, paranoia and overall irritation at each other than by settling down to a 1997 killer snowman movie. Frankly, I'm surprised this isn't a genre that's been explored further. You'd think, given the potential scope that having a killer made of snow can bring to the table, that there'd have been mountains of killer snowman movies. And yet, sitting here and recording this now, I can only think of 2, maybe 3 killer snowmen in recent memory. And even more frustratingly, at least one of those 3 is used as an assistant to the actual bad guy of the story. Seriously, someone needs to capitalise on the killer snowman genre. We have a serious shortage. Today's offering, Jack Frost, comes to us from Michael Keaton, a writer and director who's probably best known for this film, though he was also responsible for writing the 2003 movie Identity, which apparently has some quite big names attached to it. Keaton is definitely more of a writer than a director, and Jack Frost was his directional debut, which, just wow. Well, I suppose if you're given the shot to make a movie, you either go big or go home. The film was also co-written by Jeremy Page, who's really more of a producer than a writer. In fact, this film is his only writing credit. I have to assume here that his involvement is in a tweaking capacity only, both for the fact that he didn't return to help write the sequel — oh yeah, this film has a sequel — and the fact that he was the producer on this film. So, we have 2 writers who collectively have 1 credit between them at this point in 1997, and a director for whom this would be his first time directing and his second time writing. Will this be the inevitable dumpster fire it's destined to become? Well, the answer may actually surprise you. Jack Frost follows the story of Jack Frost, a serial killer who drifts into small towns, kills a few people and then moves on. All was peachy in Jack's world till one day he got caught by his then local town sheriff and Jack was sentenced to death by electrocution. The opening of the film picks up with Jack being transferred from prison to his place of execution. And while on the road, the police guards transferring him begin to taunt Jack, calling him Fried Jack and reminding him of his impending death. Angered by this, Jack silently kills the prisoner being transferred alongside him. The following silence causes the guards to get a bit distracted, and while their attention is elsewhere, the prison truck is involved in a head-on collision with a chemical disposal wagon. This allows Jack the chance to escape. However, he can't help but gloat at the police officers who mocked him, and because he hangs around, he ends up in the direct firing line from the chemical truck they crashed into, which bursts its load, covering Jack in a mysterious fluid that seemingly dissolves him into the snow. Little do the local authorities know the chemical in question has instead fused Jack's DNA into the snow, turning him into a literal living, breathing killer snowman, with the ability to move from a solid to a liquid at will, and with deadly, stabby icicle powers. Meanwhile, back in the town, the sheriff who put Jack away is having nightmares and Vietnam-esque style flashbacks to Jack's threats to destroy his life if it's the last thing he does. The sheriff's wife tries to reassure him that Jack's gone and he should move on with his life, and things seem to be getting back to normal. But there's a snowman building competition in town that the sheriff is a judge on, and when mysterious deaths begin to happen across the town, no matter how crazy it might seem, it looks like one of the snowmen may be the culprit. And when a secret agency above the FBI sweep into town looking very worried, it sets the scene for a black comedy action horror to remember. Right off the bat, I feel the need to warn you all that if you choose to watch Jack Frost, and I highly recommend you do at least once, that you grit your teeth and try your best to push through that opening 3 to 5 minutes. This is because, and I really feel that this is an understatement, the opening of this film has two of the most annoying, irritating and border unbearable voice acting bits that I have ever seen in a film, television or theatre production. So grating are these voices that it almost completely ruined the rest of the film for me. And while at first I thought these voiceovers were essential because they explain all of the events that happened in the run-up to the film's beginning, about 3 minutes after Jack gets melted, the film cuts to some characters literally more or less explaining, though without the embellishments and without the irritating voices, exactly what the voiceover characters were saying, thus making them completely pointless and one of the worst parts of this film. Seriously, battle through them because the rest of the film is more than worth it. I'd say one of the biggest observations I made about this film, and I'm sure it's an unoriginal observation, was just how trauma-like this picture was. Seriously, with the exception of 1 or 2 scenes which I think were a bit too out there even for trauma, it's got everything a good trauma movie has. Buckets of gore and blood, cast members who are very self-aware and really playing up on their dialogue, and some interesting, if not slightly unoriginal, death sequences. What's even weirder is that while it acts like a trauma, it very much looks like a Full Moon Features production. The direction is very nicely stylised for the majority of the runtime, with blacks, blues and reds being used quite prominently throughout. And while there are some scenes that do play a little flat in terms of composition, I do have to say I really got on with the look and feel of this picture. For 1997, I've got to say it's a pretty decent set of production values behind it, especially when you consider the indie nature of this production. For a first attempt at breaking into the industry, I'd have to say that this is a damn good attempt in all honesty. I think what really helps this production is that the director tries his best to keep the energy up and a sense that this is a live wire production. It also helps that he constantly keeps the audience in mind of Christmas throughout. Almost every shot in this film has either snow, Christmas decorations, or some kind of wintry vibe about it. Whether that's set props, colour choices, or location, the director cycles between these quite effortlessly. While it's not as Christmassy as Christmas Evil or Krampus, it really does try its best to at least make it look as wintry as possible. And in that regard, I'd say it succeeds quite significantly. The cine itself is probably best described as conservative. They don't mess around here, shots are used for their purpose and that's it. No frills, no gratuitous experimental shots, no muss, no fuss. This is to the detriment of the death scenes, which could have looked a lot more interesting, but instead come across as a little bit bland and in some cases even predictable. Even worse, because of the tone the direction sets up, it means that a majority of the death scenes are trying to come across as quirky and comedic, and as a result it kind of falls between being brutal and being funny, creating this weird unsettling feeling of being hyperactive and comedic. It's almost like the film's trying to say, hey look, she's been strangled and dressed up to look like a Christmas tree. Haha, blood! It's just off. In all honesty, this film's best use of cine is in hiding the animatronics and puppeteering of the giant killer snowman. It feels like he's in this movie a lot more than he actually is. Throw in some middle-of-the-road, bland, early CG shots here and there, and you end up with a film that ultimately would have probably been quite passable in its day, but looks quite considerably shabbier and past it by modern standards. The script is arguably this film's saving grace, though even that doesn't come out of this entirely unscathed. For starters, the basic plot is quite an original one for the time. While films like Child's Play and The Ginger Dead Man have also covered the serial killer is resurrected as a weird and funny thing style movie trope in the past, the way that Jack Frost handles this feels really quite fresh by comparison. And I think that's largely down to its dialogue and tone. This is a black comedy horror with an emphasis more heavily focused on the comedy, with Jack spouting winter-themed one-liners that would make Batman and Robin-era Mr. Freeze groan. The whole thing has a bit of a hyperactive manicness about it, and as the film rushes from scene to scene, either drip-feeding the townsfolk bits of information about what exactly is happening, or giving the audience more screen time with Jack, it's got a twinge of the Evil Dead 2 vibe about it, and while some of the comedy is a bit on the nose, and there's maybe a bit of an over-reliance on visual gags, it more often than not pulls it off. The closest tonally I could probably place it would be that it's a less intelligent, less witty Bride of Chucky. It knows its source material, it knows what it's trying to do. I just don't think it's all that smart of a film to actually be able to land it ultimately. But that's not a bad thing. While it may not 100% stick the landing, there's still plenty of fun to be had with this picture. The cast all seem to get what kind of film this is as well, which always helps the more self-aware features. The main heroes, for the most part, play it straight, but with just a twinge of awareness that they know that this film is a goofy slasher. Again, think Ash in The Evil Dead. And the supporting cast all seem to be having a ball with this one, hamming it up and generally doing whatever they think will make a good visual performance. Scott MacDonald in particular is also absolutely brilliant as Jack. He completely embodies the character and gives a performance that I honestly don't think anyone else could have really bettered. While I will concede he does have a bit of the Charles Lee Ray about him, particularly in the flashback sequences, I consider that just a quite nice element of his character and not the base element. He's ultimately totally malevolent, angry and a touch unhinged. It's a great mixture of range, and MacDonald really goes the extra mile to give that range, which I thought was nice. It's a great mixed performance, and MacDonald really goes the extra mile to give that range, which I thought was really nice. The soundtrack as well is also quite good fun. It's all quite smooth jazz and dramatic reworkings of Christmas classics. While I will admit it does sound a little stocky in places, I think it really works for the overall tone of this picture. It's a festive film, and there aren't really a whole lot of aspects of wiggle room when it comes to films set at Christmas. Hell, even Die Hard struggled to avoid playing Christmas tunes here and there. It's definitely not the worst OST I've ever heard, and there's almost certainly enough scope here to keep me on board. There was just a real risk of them going sappy to contrast with the gore and violence, and I'm very glad they avoided that, as it would have been quite predictable. So hats off to them, really. Camp as Christmas and just a touch sleazy, Jack Frost may not be everyone's cup of tea. To me, it's just a bit of a weird halfway house between Troma and Full Moon, and because it falls between these two quite drastically different film companies, it sort of embodies neither of them. The result is a very strange feeling film that looks too polished for the gratuity that it's showcasing. But that's not to say that it's an unenjoyable film. The direction's really decent, the cine, while a touch bland, is at least decent enough. Those elements, coupled with a more than decent script, make this film one that I can definitely recommend you watch at least once in your life. While the ending is predictable and a bit underwhelming, this isn't really one of those kinds of films where the ending matters. What matters with this film is the journey, and geez if this film doesn't take you on a journey. So this Christmas, whether you're on your own, with family or friends, or in the company of a loved one, why not settle down in the glow of the Christmas lights, pour yourself a big mug of cocoa, and sing some time with Jack Frost. You can honestly do worse. So till 2019, this is me wishing you the very merriest of Christmases and the happiest of New Years. See you all next year.